Alright, you guys know the drill. Passage 3. I'm going to set a timer for 10 minutes and jump on it. So let me go ahead and press play. Okay, so selfless service, Western conception, Sikhism, God. Okay, so it's a religious passage. That's humanities, which means there's going to be some hierarchy. Something is more important than something else. So it's going to be very, very opinionated. Let's find out what that opinion is. At the very least, the sense of purpose and fulfillment that comes with such selfless service should be reason enough to transcend the need for the service to be done in a religious context. So, should be reason enough. So transcending the need for selfless service needing to be done in a religious context. So you should be able to do that because of the sense of purpose and fulfillment that comes with such selfless service. So that's what the author is trying to say, that you don't need religious context to be able to perform selfless service, because doing so brings you a sense of purpose and fulfillment, which is cool. The concept of selfless service is compatible with secular society as long as there remains a mutual sense of duty to perform such service for its fellow members. Yeah, so it's about being able to perform selfless service in a secular society, which is a good thing. Okay. Look at that layout. There's about, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 paragraphs. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Let's see what that first shift in tone is, assuming, cycle. In Western society, again, a bunch of context. However, that's a shift in tone right there. However, there we go. Okay, and then 1. Okay, excellent. So, looks like the first shift in tone is somewhere, maybe in the first, maybe in the third paragraph. That means that this is going to be context. This is going to be some evidence and proof, and this is going to be the conclusion. All right, let's pause at the top before we read. Let's ask ourselves some questions and rephrase the thesis. So again, the thesis is saying that you should be able to perform selfless service in a secular society without religious context. My question is, how does the author prove that that this is possible, and demonstrate that that it's necessary in the first place? It's a need, and so on and so forth. So let's see, how does the author prove that that is the case? So the Harmandir Sahib in Amritsar, also known as the Golden Temple, is the most revered Sikh temple in the world. And so again, this is a bunch of context, so I'm probably just going to kind of buzz through it. Even as compared to blah, 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 the construction began, blah, blah, blah. For the last few centuries, it's been the site of many events in history. Today, Sikhs from all across northern India. So again, all of this is sort of red herring. It's just a distraction. It's not really important, it seems like. One of the core tenets of Sikhism is a principle of selfless service called seva. The idea of selfless service is an important concept because God is perceived as residing within each being, and so by serving others, you are indirectly serving God. So this behavior is no more clear than within the Golden Temple's langar, or free lunch, which serves beyond 100,000 people every day without distinction of background. However, this principle of seva does not manifest itself one time with this one temple. It is a common practice worldwide among all Sikhs and all Sikh temples. Okay, so again, I'm not sure. So now, if this is the first shift in tone, I'm supposed to pause, and I'm supposed to connect it with the concluding sentence. So the concluding sentence talks about how selfless service should be done in a secular context, and that doesn't really connect with this idea that all Sikh temples practice seva and not just Golden Temple. Like, that's an entirely different sort of set of claims that doesn't really relate. So I'm not really sure how that relates to it. So maybe there's something else better later on. In Western society, the notion of selfless service is a bit difficult to grasp, especially as society becomes more secular. Okay. It is easy to cast off religious acts of service as unrealistic and based upon delusion, but, here we go, that's a nice shift in tone, the fundamental beliefs that lead worshippers in Sikhism to dutifully perform seva is still worth understanding. Now that connects much better to the concluding thesis, so I would say that this is the better shift in tone, but we were still correct in saying that the first shift in tone is here, It's just that the main shift in tone is in paragraph 4, so that means that this is still sort of contextual, these 3 paragraphs, and then it starts to get nice and juicy over here. This is the proof, and this is the conclusion. So let's see how the author proves that in Western society that selfless service is a bit difficult to grasp, right? Because that's a claim that the author's making. So Sikhs believe that human beings spend their existence in a cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. The cycle continues until the being becomes in union with God. I believe that's common among other religions. The criteria that determines the quality of life of a Sikh is based on karma, a measurement of how well or badly a person behaved. Without this belief in this law, the motivation for performing selfless service seems to dissipate. Again, seems to dissipate. That means that the author is not saying that this is the truth. It just says that it might be perceived as the truth. Assuming that this is the Western conception of motivation for Sikhs performing seva. Yeah, see, so the author is saying that this is the Western idea for why Sikhs perform seva. That they do it because, they don't want to be punished. They want to be, they're doing it because of the law of karma. But in reality, the author already told us that they're doing it because God is perceived as residing within each being, and they're doing it to become in union with God. So this is what the author believes is the motivation, but this is what the author says that the Western conception of the motivation is, and so that's 2 different things. As is the case with any motivation, if that is the case, if we take the Western conception as the truth, is it then possible to generate this sense of selfless service without believing in the law of karma? Well, as is the case with any motivation, if there is a payoff, then the behavior will occur. All right, examining volunteerism in secular society points to this payoff as a feeling of fulfillment and existential purpose. And so this payoff is. So whether or not the religious foundations are true, developing this sense of unified shared belief of selfless service, such as those embedded in the Sikh religion, would at least benefit the individual performing it, if not benefiting the whole of society, because of their own individual payoff that they get of fulfillment and existential purpose. All right. So which of the following claims would benefit from additional support? Okay, so it's going to be a claim, and it's going to be a claim that did not have much support afterwards. So selfless service is compatible with secular society. Well, that's definitely the entire point of the passage, so that has plenty of support. It's pretty weak, so let's look at B. Seva is no more clear than within the Golden Temple's Langar. Again, that had plenty of support afterwards. Showed a bunch of examples of how they did that. So let's just cross off A for now. Leave B in the game. So C, if there is a payoff for the behavior, then the behavior will most likely occur. That was a claim, but that didn't really have as much support as B, so B is definitely gone. Yeah, C was just sort of a claim made on its own without any additional sort of support. Developing the sense of unified shared belief of selfless service, such as those embedded in the Sikh religion, would at least benefit the individual. And again, that was definitely touched on a bit more in the rest of the passage. And so C is definitely something that would maybe require some additional support. What is the main idea? Well, the notion of selfless service is a bit difficult to grasp, especially as Western society becomes more secular. That's just sort of a setup. It's not really the main idea. The fulfillment that comes when performing selfless service, void of religious context, is an adequate substitute for the feeling of achieving union with God. That's perfect. So A is gone. Sikhs are motivated to perform selfless service to avoid punishments of karma. Again, that is what the Western society says, not what the author says. So Sikhism adapted its core tenets from older religions present in the Indian subcontinent, and that was just sort of contextual, wasn't really the main point. Which of the following claims would challenge the author's argument? Western society has a long history of secular selfless service. That would definitely challenge the author's argument, because the author is saying that apparently what selfless service is very foreign to secular society, so A is pretty good. The primary goal of many Hindus is to become in union with God. Well, that's what the author says. The commonly held explanation in Western society about the Golden Temple's high rate of volunteerism relates to upholding karmic law. Again, that is what the author says is what people believe is the reason why Sikhs do perform this service. So that is really good, supports the author's argument. Majority of volunteers in secular regions of the world report feelings of fulfillment as their primary motivators of their service. Again, examining volunteerism, that's exactly what the author's saying, that volunteerism points to the payoff being a sense of fulfillment, which supports that. So A is the right answer here. What is the most likely reason for the usage of the italics for the word seems in paragraph 5? And again, that was just to point out that the commonly held explanation in Western society is that they do selfless service because they don't want to be punished by karmic law. So to emphasize the truth of the claim made in that sentence, okay. I don't think that that's what the author's trying to say. To highlight that the claim made in the sentence is a representation of the Western interpretation of the motivation for performing seva, that's much better. To provide context for the points later on in the passage, not as good as B. To illustrate the difficulty in understanding the motivation for performing seva. No, the author doesn't think it's difficult, so B is pretty good. Which of the following could be an example of seva? So anytime you're doing selfless service. So you're doing it for a sense of purpose and fulfillment, not to get any sort of thing in return. So an employer giving an employee a raise in order to keep them on board, not really. A college student volunteering at an animal shelter to boost their application, definitely not. A teacher giving an elementary student an extra sticker if they keep quiet during class. Yeah, it's very conditional. The CEO of a large corporation spending 1 month out of the year investing in building schools in rural areas for no profit. That's much better. Okay. All right, done. Let's slow down. Take a deep breath. So, again, right? The first step being you got to look at the passage, see what the buzzwords are. You see that there's a bunch of religions about God, so that's more of a religion passage, which is a humanities passage, which means that there's going to be this hierarchy of more important and less important things. So what is the thing that the author says is really, really important, right? And we can find that over here in the concluding paragraph with this phrase that we highlighted, which is a normative phrase. Again, normative phrases, things like must be or should be, those are wonderful, wonderful phrases to pay attention to, because that's what the author is trying to say. Hey, this is the way the world should work, right? This is the most important thing to look at. And so we have to interpret it. What is it that the author is saying around that phrase there? So this sense of purpose and fulfillment is good enough, right? This is good enough of a reason to transcend the need. Transcending the need is the thing that's lower over here. So that transcends the need for the service to be done in a religious context. So the fact that selfless service apparently needs to be done in a religious context is not very important. What's more important is that there is a sense of purpose and fulfillment that comes with selfless service, which should be more important than thinking that you need to be believing in God to perform those same service acts. Okay, so that's that hierarchy. And then we kind of looked at the shifts in tone. We found one over here. We thought that would be the first shift in tone. So we thought that every time there's a first shift in tone, the assumption is that whatever's after that first shift in tone is going to be the main thesis. It's not always the case, and that's what we found out later on. So we came to the top. We paused and we sort of backtracked and we restated what that thesis was, right? And we asked ourselves, okay, well, if the thesis is saying that the sense of purpose and fulfillment is good enough to transcend the need for selfless service to be done in a religious context, well, how does the author prove this, right? And so we read from top down, and we read a bunch of context. We didn't really pay too much attention to it because we knew that it's more about the sense of purpose and fulfillment that comes outside of a religious context. So knowing what happens inside this religious context is not as important to us for the main idea. So I didn't spend too much time kind of understanding the details of when this was constructed and this word and that word and this word. There's no need to. But once I got to some of these phrases, so these are sort of causal phrases. So anytime I see because or whatever, or and so, these are sort of relational type phrases I like to highlight. So it's explaining the motivation of the behavior of why Sikhs perform selfless service, and they perform it because of They believe that God is perceived as residing within each being, and so by doing that, you're indirectly serving God. Then they give an example over here. Then the first shift in tone comes, and the first shift in tone, again, the next step after you find it is you're supposed to connect it to what you read in the conclusion. And if they don't really connect, then you must kind of ask yourself, okay, is this really the most important thing here? And so the reason why it didn't seem like it was because it didn't really relate. It's not like the passage wasn't arguing that people think that the Golden Temple is the only example of selfless service, and that selfless service is in all of these temples. That's not really the point of the passage. The point the author ends up making is that you should be able to transcend religious context. So it just didn't seem like it made sense. And that's the benefit of this method, where you kind of understand the conclusion first, because you don't want to be tripped up by those unnecessary details as you're reading the passage. And this is a perfect passage to exemplify how all of this stuff is basically unnecessary, except for giving you an insight into why Sikhs perform selfless service, which is like right here. That phrase is the only necessary phrase, literally, in these first 3 paragraphs. And understanding that the end of the point of the passage, having read that at the start, is how you're able to determine what's relevant and what's not relevant. Make sense? Okay, so in Western society, right, so now it's sort of shifting away from Sikhism. Now it's saying in Western society, the notion of selfless service is a bit difficult to grasp, right? So that's kind of your main sort of shift, and you're starting to get a bit more of a relevant shift in tone over here. It's more subtle, but it's still a relevant shift in tone. You're going from Sikhs to Western society, right, religious to secular, so that's a bit of a shift. And so now we're starting to get to the juicy parts of the passage. So especially, right, that's an emphasis word, that's why I highlighted it, especially as society becomes more secular. And I like to highlight these words because, as I'm reading, it's not necessary for me to come back here. That's not why I'm highlighting it, but I'm highlighting it to make sure that as I'm reading it in my mind, that I am emphasizing these phrases. Because, again, all of these words here, they're not really that important. But there are some key words here and here. All the words that I highlighted, those are key phrases that you learn to highlight, because they represent exactly what sort of tone of voice you should be reading this passage within. And when you have that good tone of voice, you're really in synchronicity with the author as well. All right, so especially as society becomes blah blah, right? It is easy to cast off. We're just kind of setting up a shift in tone over here, to cast off religious acts of service, right, as unrealistic. But the fundamental beliefs that lead worshippers is still worth understanding. So we got that shift in tone over here, which is a bit more connected to that conclusion. So then we kind of reformulated. We said, okay, that is the first shift in tone, but it's not really important. What's important is in paragraph 4. And the rest of it was kind of showing that, okay, Sikhs believe that you become in union with God, but the Western belief of why religious people or Sikhs do this is because, they're just doing it because they're being judged based upon karma, and they don't want to they want to break out of this cycle. Well, that's not really why they're doing it, but that's what the Western conception is for why they do it. But so that the author basically is saying, okay, well, let's assume that this is the truth. Like even considering that, even though the Western conception is not right, let's take them as the truth. Is it still possible to generate selfless service without believing in the law of karma? And so the author says, yes, it's possible if you have a payoff, and that payoff is the sense of fulfillment that you get from doing it. And that's the main idea. So, these types of problems, you have which of the following claims would benefit from additional support. Again, this is basically reasoning within the text. You're being tested on your ability to scrutinize the argument. The main idea, this is a foundations of comprehension problem. Which of the following claims would challenge the author's argument. Again, this is sort of reasoning within the text, being able to scrutinize the argument, understand what the argument was, what is the use of the word seems, That's reasoning within the text as well, being able to scrutinize why the author used the word that they used. And which is an example of seva, that's reasoning beyond the text, being able to apply the concepts that you read in the text to outside information. So we have a good mixture of these sort of three categories of problems that the WMC will test you on. Each of them have their own specific process, as you know. And in this situation, you know, how you solve these types of problems, you know, is that you have to say, okay, well, they're each. So which of the following claims would benefit from additional support? So that means that the answer choice that's correct must be a claim from the passage. It has to have been a claim in the passage. But it must have been a claim that was isolated, that didn't really have any additional sort of points afterwards. So A was a claim, but it did have a lot of additional support. B was a claim, of course, and it definitely did have more support, right? It goes on to talk about Golden Temple, you know, being able to serve this many people and all this other stuff, right? So that's an additional support of that claim. Developing a sense of unified, if there's a payoff for the behavior, then the behavior will most likely occur. That was a claim that was made, but again, the author just sort of casually says, as is the case with any motivation, if there's a payoff, then it doesn't really go on to explain that or support that additionally. So that's sort of just an isolated claim that was made, so C is the right answer there. What is the main idea of the passage? Again, being able to perform selfless service because you feel purpose and fulfillment from it is reason enough to transcend having to believe in karma and God. And that's exactly what B says. So which of the following claims would challenge the author's argument? With these types, you're just basically trying to understand what was the author's sort of claiming throughout the passage. You know, what were the set of assumptions that they were using when it comes to concluding their argument. So the assumption for this is that, again, Western conception is this, that, you know, it's a bit difficult to grasp. But all these claims that we highlight, like, you know, is, right? Anytime they say sort of, you know, these things are a bit difficult to grasp, this is a bit difficult to grasp, that's just a claim. So just because the author says that that's the case, doesn't mean that the author's right. So even though the word is might generate your interpretation as being like, oh, this is a fact, like this is like a factual, no, it's still the author's opinion. So anytime the author's making a claim, the MCAT wants to test your ability to scrutinize whether or not that claim is justified. Like, is that really true, or is the author assuming that that's the way it is, okay? That's what these problems are testing your ability to understand. So the author's assuming that the Western society can't grasp selfless service. And so if this claim challenges that directly. You know, Western society has a long history of secular selfless service. That claim would challenge the author's, you know, claim that it's difficult for them to grasp. So if they have a long history, that means that it's not very difficult for them to grasp secular selfless service. What is the most likely reason for the use of italics? Again, you locate this word in the passage in paragraph 5. And italics, you must just remember this, that italics are used sort of as an emphasis of whatever. So it's an emphasis, but it's also sort of trying to show, again, the word seems, it's a disconnection from the author to this claim. So the author's disconnecting him or herself from this claim here, right? And then right afterwards they're saying, assuming that this is the Western conception, right? So that's the disconnect right there. So the author's saying, this is not my conception, this is the Western conception. I don't believe this, but the Western conception of motivation for why Sikhs perform selfless service is because they believe in the law of karma, which is what B says. So which of the following could be an example of seva? And again, it's just being able to understand what is seva. Seva is selfless service. So anything that generates that sort of notion of doing things not for yourself, not for any sort of additional personal gain other than purpose and fulfillment, is what this seva would be. So giving a raise to keep an employee on board, that's sort of personal gain. College student volunteering to boost their application, that's personal gain. Teacher giving a student a sticker if they keep quiet is personal gain. CEO spending a month investing in building schools for no profit is not really any personal gain other than fulfillment and purpose, right? So D would be the strongest example of that. All right, guys. So again, study those passage types. This is a humanities passage, so study the fact that you're looking for some sort of a hierarchy, right? That there's something that's more important than something else. And study those phrases that you want to highlight as you read. Study the process, step-by-step process of reading the concluding sentence, looking for the first shift in tone, validating your discovery of the first shift in tone, connecting it to the concluding sentence, pausing for a second, restating the thesis in your mind, and then again highlighting more. Memorize these processes for problem solving with each of these categories. Memorize these sort of answer choice reasoning, so processes as well, and making sure that you're choosing the answer choice that is the most supported and least rationalized based upon this logic over here. Yeah, again, if you have any questions on any of these problems, screenshot it, stick it in that Reddit community that's private for just us only, and I will jump on and answer those questions, or somebody in the community will jump on and answer those questions as well. Alright, take care, best of luck, and I'll see you in the next video.